Hello and welcome to FTD Talk. My name is John James and I am a writer and campaigner for male victims of female perpetrated domestic violence and an advocate for men's mental health. Today I talk to Dr Michele Finneran, who has a PhD in conflict management and is the author of this book, Surviving Domestic Abuse. We talk about domestic abuse, formal and informal support systems, and why a victim of abuse cannot leave their abuser. It's a good one and I can't wait for you to hear it. But before I go, don't forget to press that like button, smash that subscribe button. The bigger the channel gets, the more people I can help. I hope you find it interesting. You take care now. Peace. Okay, welcome Michele to FTD Talk.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, John. I appreciate it.
And I've read your book, Surviving Domestic Abuse. And but before we begin, can you tell me who Michele Finneran is and what's your background?
So I have been in this field of psychotherapy for mental health. I was, in my earlier career when I was a teenager, I was a mental health tech, and then I just, kept doing education, getting my bachelor's, my master's, my PhD. And throughout that whole time span, I worked for local community mental health centers in my area. And then for about 10, 11 years. And then for the past 12, 13 years, I've been in my own private practice called Vecc and Associates here in Coral Springs, Florida, in the United States. And so what I've been doing is, as of recent, I've been wanting to do more educational and more informative types of projects. For instance, writing books, writing blogs, updating my website, doing more things that are more educational in nature and more informative for my audience and for other people's audiences, like your audience as well. My education is in my undergraduate is in psychology. My master's is in mental health counseling. I have a license to practice in the state of Florida, the Department of Health in Tallahassee. And then my PhD is actually in conflict resolution and dispute analysis, where I work with couples, families, organizations, municipalities, and I work with them to resolve conflict and to understand the dynamics of the organization or the relationship or family.
And how did you come to write the book? You seem to have a very varied background. So
yes. So when in about 2005, I worked for a local community jail in the area, and what I was doing there is I was working with inpatient incarcerated female incarcerated women. And so what I found there is when I was doing groups, I was doing a lot of groups and education, and I was running a domestic violence, anger management, and conflict resolution group. And what was happening was I was realizing that as I was doing my groups and, talking individually with the inmates, that a lot of these people that were incarcerated, women that were incarcerated, were actually victims of domestic violence. And I found that to be a little very disturbing, actually. So much when I went, while this was happening, I was in my PhD program. I brought it to the attention of my chair, my PhD chair, and we actually had discussions about it. And she said, let's look at this. Let's look at the system. Let's look at this flawed system that we have going on in the United States. And so what I did is I did a preliminary research on what type of formal supports that domestic violence victims, women, females have, and what type of informal supports that they have or don't have. And I did a research literature review on that. And then as I was doing the research project, I interviewed survivors of domestic abuse. And so that those interviews were very, very eye-opening. It was actually a qualitative study and dissecting the saturation of the information in the interviews was just amazing. A lot of the survivors said a lot of the same things.
And your book obviously concentrates on female victims of abuse, where
yes.
from my part, I concentrate on male victims of abuse.
Yes.
In the book, though, I found a lot of things that really resonated with me as a male victim of abuse. Is there any personality type that makes you more vulnerable to be a victim?
I would say someone who is a little bit more maybe passive, quiet, maybe someone who is not really off to stand up for themselves. Maybe somebody who may have a little bit of a self-esteem, self-confidence issue. Definitely, I feel like a lot of it is a learned behavior. So a lot of these female victims learned how to be victims from their family of origin and from their mothers. The relationship between the mother and daughter with female victims is spot on, very important, that same sex. I don't know. Well, I'm interested in knowing from you, John, from your perspective, and I know this is your interview, but I'm interested in knowing what in the book resonated with you that are similar in nature for you as a male victim of DV.
I think what you've just said about like the relationship between the female victim and the mother, my relationship with my mother, she was very dominating. So I think that had a lot to do with my abuse. And also I am very sort of passive, and I would say a gentle person.
Yeah.
And not really confrontational.
Right.
And I think that had a lot to do with it. And a lot of what you said in the book, and about especially when we get round to the support systems and the criticism that you have for some of the support systems, they resonated with me as well, because I had a lot of problems with my support systems as well. So I think a lot of the female victims and male victims, they have a lot in common.
Do they?
I think so.
I think one of the biggest differences I find when I did a little bit of preliminary research on male victims is a different type of humiliation and embarrassment that goes with being a male victim of DV. It's different than a female. It's definitely different than a female victim humiliation, and it's a
Go ahead. I think that men are less likely to come forward and talk about it.
Absolutely.
I think there is more shame when it comes to a male victim of abuse, definitely. Like when we get around to the support systems, the support systems are so different, especially when you come to work colleagues and employers. I think there's a lot of shame around that would prevent you from doing that, prevent you from using those as a support system.
Prevent you from speaking out. And really tapping into people that you think might be supportive, but then did you realize that they really weren't?
I wouldn't speak out at work anyway.
Okay.
I would never speak out at work, and I don't think many men would, because it's like talking to your mates down the pub, a woman hit me. That's gonna cause, or could cause, a lot of laughter, a lot of making fun of you. So I don't think you'd really speak out at work. I don't think there's many men that would.
Right. What I found that women, what were happening is that the perpetrator would actually go to the female victim's work, and so that was the female victim had to be forced to talk to their supervisor, and have kind of what I recommended for a person who goes to a supervisor as an organization. There needs to have an organizational safety plan for the organization. So if a case perpetrator, female or male, walks upon a work premise, that there is a systematic way of doing things, and not gaining access to people, and particularly the victim, male or female, in that situation. I do feel that male victims are much more stigmatized
Yeah.
than female victims, and that makes it extremely hard. Now, no, studies have shown even recently there are more and more and more male victims now,
Yeah.
and more and more aggressive, hostile females happening now in our culture. I don't know where you're at, but that's what we're seeing kind of in the States, seeing more of that happening.
Yeah, I find from the male victims that I've spoken to on the show, I think there's a difference between the violence as well. The female abuser, from a lot of people that I've spoken to, attacks in the sleep.
Okay.
And it is extremely violent. There are so many men that I've spoken to who've been woken up in the morning by having a freshly boiled kettle of water poured on them.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah. And that seems to be a popular weapon for the female abuser. So I think the violence is a lot different as well.
Yeah. The violence is very different. I think for female victims, it's a lot of this starts off very much so emotional abuse, and degrading and humiliating and ridiculing, which then turns into, and it doesn't end up being like a life or death situation. It ends up being that way, but it doesn't start off being that way. You don't wake up and just like punch your partner. That usually is a buildup that happens over time that illustrates more and more deathly and fatal type of injuries and attacks that males have on female victims. So, and even in doctors' offices, when a victim would go in, a doctor can see if there what types of markings are on the body, and can ask then, which doesn't happen very often, is an assessment when they see some types of attack wounds of some sort. There's usually what medical practitioners really don't do is doing a DV assessment, but there are many out there for practitioners to use, and I think I mentioned some in the book that I talked about. So, yeah.
On the flip side, talking about personality types, is there a personality type or a certain person who would become an abuser?
Yeah, someone who is has I would per se feel like a lot of male abusers have personality disorders, very narcissistic, into themselves. It's something that I would describe as, somebody who is extremely charming and witty, and someone who is friendly, and everyone loves them outside the scope of the home. I mean, friends with neighbors, like have very, very charismatic personality, but come within the home, a completely different animal we're talking about now. So it's like a Jekyll and Hyde, if you will. Like a lot of my survivors described the personality types of the perpetrators as like a Jekyll and Hyde. Like you never know what you're going to expect, and when in conflict, it's always made out to be like they are crazy, like there's something wrong with them. And so that's historically have been that type, like a very manipulative, aggressive, hostile, verbally and physically type of personality trait. So those narcissistic antisocial personality disorders, personality disorders that just have no regard, no empathy for human existence, human life, is typically what has been described to me by my female victims.
And it's exactly the same for male victims.
Is it?
From the men that I've spoken to, and in my experience, it's exactly the same. The relationship happened very quickly.
Yes.
With a very charming, loving individual, who had seem to have a lot in common with what became the male abused, and the build up of aggression, like you so eloquently said, from manipulation to aggression, was very gradual.
It's very gradual, and it, you know what's confusing though for a lot of people that have been abused is subtle. It can be very subtle, and it's not like it's not overt. You know, it's not like in your face direct. It's very subtle, and it's very like it's very like calculating.
Yeah,
if you will. You know, that's what I sense. You feel the same way in terms of your experience?
In my experience, it wasn't subtle at all. It began with pinching and twisting my skin, punching me in the chest. But when I did question it, my manhood was questioned. I thought you're supposed to be a man. You know, like all I'm doing is playing. So yeah, it wasn't subtle with me at all. And with the cycle of violence that you usually get, cycle of abuse that you usually get, there was no apology on my part.
There was no like honeymoon phase.
No. My partner, when she'd begun of abuse, then she said to me, "This isn't going to get any better. This is me. It's only going to get worse."
Oh wow.
So at least she was honest.
Honestly, you know what, John, I really do feel like, you know, there is a cycle of abuse, and it's typically that cycle of abuse is made for you know, female victims. I definitely feel like, you know, what something that, because you're in this field and you have researched it and actually experienced it, there might be a completely different cycle of abuse, and it would have to take, you know, interviewing and surveying, you know, male victims, a different type of abuse, a cycle of abuse for male victimology. You know, so I definitely feel that that's something that it needs more exploring, needs more research around, needs more men stepping up and saying and speaking up and explaining and talking about in detail their experiences. So what we know is, you know, abuse, tension building, honeymoon phase for the cycle of abuse, cycle of violence. It maybe looks something completely different for male victims, and that's something that that's a research topic that's open for people to really just kind of examine and explore.
Well, in your book, you talk about one of the biggest questions that I've been asked: why didn't you leave?
Yes, I say that you're asked that question
all the time. Why didn't you leave? Why didn't you get out as soon as it started? Why didn't you leave? And to be quite honest, I don't know, because she was that honest and said it's not going to stop. I have no idea why I didn't leave. Can you explain a few reasons why people don't leave?
Yes, one of the biggest reasons that I talk about on podcasts is something called, and I don't know if this is the same in male victimology, but traumatic emotional bonding. And that traumatic emotional bonding is something that is it's a bonding that happens. It's almost called the Stockholm Syndrome, where the Stockholm Syndrome is where captors who went in Stockholm, Sweden, robbed a bank and captured, you know, a couple of their victims, and over time they grew. The people that were the perpetrators and robbing the bank built a traumatic bonding relationship with their victims, and their victims actually stayed and actually grew very fond of their captors. It's a very twisted and it's a very convoluted type of bonding that happens, but it's emotional. It's strictly emotional, and it's traumatic, and it's something that is like the perpetrator, whether male or female, works on that that type of bonding and that type of emotional traumatic bonding that staples the victim there. And that's why a lot of providers or a lot of people on scene, like law enforcement, they don't understand. And that's why that question is always asked, like, why didn't you just leave? Well, it would be easy if it was simple. It's not simple. It's not simple. You have an emotional traumatic bonding that has happened over time, and there's investment. There is a feeling of love there, even though it's dysfunctional type of love. There is a feeling of all that there, so that staples the victim, even though they are getting abused. It staples the victim right where the perpetrator wants them to be, right there. And so when people ask that question, why don't you just leave? It's almost like, is that really a fair question to even ask a victim, male or female? Is that even a fair question to even subject a victim to? It's almost, I feel like it's almost like if you really were to understand what domestic violence is and the inside scopes of the emotionality that takes place when you're a victim versus a perpetrator, you will understand that emotional traumatic bonding is something that staples the victim right where they are. And that's why they can't necessarily, and sometimes don't even want to leave. Listen, when a law enforcement comes to the scene, it's a very dangerous situation for law enforcement. The victim calls law enforcement. The law enforcement comes to the scene, arrests the perpetrator. The victim then attacks the law enforcement officer. This is the cycle that continues to happen. And this is why law enforcement sometimes have such a hard time going to these calls, because of the amount of danger that's attached to them.
Yeah, see, that's different as well with male victims. A lot of the male victims that I've spoken to, they've called the police for their own domestic violence. The police have arrived and arrested the male.
Yes.
Because that seems to be the mentality of that male is the perpetrator, the woman is the victim.
Right.
You also talk about support systems within abuse. Can you tell me the difference between formal and informal support systems?
Sure. So the formal support systems are anybody who's professional in nature that helps victims. I'm talking about counselors. I'm talking about lawyers. I'm talking about the court systems. I'm talking about law enforcement officers. I'm talking about clergy or priests or pastors. I'm talking about formal supports. These are all formal supports, judges that help the victim, that the victim utilize is to help abolish their domestic violence relationship. Informal supports are not professionals in nature. They're more personal in nature. We're talking parents, we're talking relatives, we're talking friends, we're talking neighbors, we're talking coworkers and supervisors. Those are people that are on more of a personal level, that are not educated or skilled in helping the victim population.
Thank you. The formal support systems that you mentioned, a lot of men that I've spoken to, and including myself, have had huge problems with the formal support systems. The police not believing you, not investigating properly.
Yes.
The medical professionals not recognizing an abused person, which makes it's difficult for them, for the medical professionals, because like you said, the female victims will defend their abuser. Now, when I was taken into hospital because she put me in the hospital. I was on crutches for 3 weeks because she kicked me so hard. He asked me why, and I defended it, and I just said, oh, I had an accident.
Right.
I didn't tell him the truth. Why would somebody defend an abuser?
Well, I feel like for a male for a male victim, if you admit you're admitting that you were attacked by a female perpetrator,
Mm.
then what comes into question is your masculinity,
Mm-hmm.
and your question as a man, and that feeling of that level of embarrassment and humiliation that male victims do have when attacked by a female perpetrator comes into play. That comes full force, and
Mm-hmm.
therefore instead of admitting, and there's a lot of shame based around it, so then you defend or you make an excuse as to what really did not happen, and that's why you're on crutches. So again, you're almost like saving face, if you
Mm-hmm.
will, as a man, having to be masculine in your manhood. You're almost defending that. You're maybe not so much defending her, you're defending yourself as a man
Mm-hmm.
in nature.
Do you think that's a personal thing in your own head, or do you think it's a societal thing, what society puts on men?
I definitely feel it's a societal thing. I feel like it's definitely the type of stereotypes that we assume that men should be a man, and what that actually means, and definition defined by society's rules. And having males become victims I would understand why there would be issues with the informal supports,
Mm-hmm.
because of the societal stereotypes that are out there for male victimology. So absolutely, I feel like it's more of a struggle to seek help. In the first part of my book, I talk about seeking help,
Yeah.
and why there are such barriers for women to seek help. Well, the barriers are there for men trying to seek help as well.
Yeah.
Just having that masculinity and that manhood come into question really messes with a male's ego and sense of self and pride, and everything that comes along with that. So
Because of the problems that you mentioned with support systems, different support systems throughout your book, and the problems that I've encountered and the problems that other male victims have encountered, is that a training issue, do you think? Or
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I think that, I think there has to be two separate types of trainings. One, if you're training for a female victim, and one if you're training for a male victim.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be two separate types of, because there are two separate types of ideologies that take place with two very different types of victimizations, I would say. So in terms of but the research that I did on the female victimology is that training definitely needs to take place, understanding of what domestic violence entails, and why that question, why didn't you just leave, really needs to be negated, and understanding as like that traumatic emotional bonding really needs to be understood in formal supportive systems.
Yeah, I've always fought for equity, not equality, because I do think that a different approach needs to be taken, whether it's a male victim or a female victim, very much so.
Right. Absolutely.
One of the other support systems that you mentioned is blogging, and I found that writing my book was hugely cathartic.
Yes.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think writing things down is so powerful?
I think because when you have a story, especially a personal story, that is untapped. Your book is popular and it's needed in society because it goes untapped. It's untapped, that there's not a whole lot of that. Meaning, what I'm saying is untapped is there's a whole lot of literature out there on male victimology.
Yeah, true.
So that's why when I did the literature review, I found gaps when I was writing my book at that time on supportive systems for female victimology. So the reason why you realize that, number one, there's a large gap in research and in literature about your topic about male victimology. Huge.
Mhm.
Not many people have written about it. Not many people have discussed it. Not many men want to talk about it.
Mhm.
You are
Yeah.
opening your book opens the dialogue. It opens the conversation. It opens by you explaining and sharing your experience as a male victim. You are making it acceptable for men to step up and voice up, you
Mhm.
know, and that you are almost like a vessel for other men. And I know it sounds kind of like maybe a lot of people that are authors don't really feel that they are a vessel for a population that is silenced or
Mhm.
feel like shame-based. And so you writing this book is almost a vessel to other male victims to say, you know, if you are a male victim, this is how you get help. This is what's really going on here. Let's be more accepting and less stigmatizing with this particular topic. So you writing this book was probably for you on many levels cathartic and
Mhm.
therapeutic for you, for you as a person, John. But also what it did is allowed other people, other males, to realize and accept the fact that, okay, now when anytime when people see similar experiences or related experiences, they feel like they're able to stand up a little bit firmer in their stance when other people are going through what they're going through. You know, so
Yeah.
you writing this book acted as a vessel for other male victims to speak up on your
Mhm.
podcast, to talk about these things that are not really talked about.
Yeah, I do. Even though people have come forward, men have come forward to speak on the show, and there has been a very positive reaction towards the book, I still think there's an apathy out there. I still think that more men need to take control, because I think that is the the whole uh, center of everything, the whole core of everything, is to take control, to own what happened to you, male or female.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't really matter. But I think taking control of that and regaining the power that you have,
Yeah,
I think it's
it's
extremely important.
it's a restorative power that needs to be, you know, like a sense of empowerment. In the last part of my book, you know, I talk about an empowerment model
Mhm.
for victimization, and having victims that do feel empowered to speak up and talk about their experiences and share and shed some light on what they went through, leads other women or other victims to stand up and speak up as well. So that level of empowerment, taking back your power, restoring your power, is
Mhm.
very important for victimization.
Going on to informal support systems, uh, family and friends. I don't know about female, how you found female. Well, I do because I've read the book. But
Mhm.
if you could tell us about how females found the support system of family and friends. I couldn't tell my family and friends.
Right.
I was too embarrassed about it. But how did females find it?
Um, well, females, when they shared their experiences, like again, the mothers of the survivors were not emotionally available
Hmm.
for their daughters, which made it very hard. And a lot of the male mothers of the female victim actually sides with the perpetrator, and makes not really believing their daughter, you know,
Yeah.
it reinforces that kind of dismissiveness for the victim. So I found that there was not a whole lot of emotional support coming from the same sex parent, for female victims. not a whole lot of emotional support.
Mhm.
Now there's tangible support. If you need help with babysitting, if you need help with money, if you need help with housing, I'm there. But
Yeah.
that's not really what female victims needed from their mothers. They really needed the emotional understanding and the emotional support from their mothers. And that was just not available to them.
Yeah.
And so when that's not available, and when you're growing up and you're rearing, it's not there, you seek it out other ways in your intimate partner relationships. You seek it out in, similar ways, than what you've experienced growing up in your family of origin. So I don't know if it's the same in the male victim population, but that's how it kind of went down for female victimization.
Yeah.
And a lot of females did go to their friends, and their friends actually recommended, them seeking formal supports like a mental health counselor to talk
Yeah.
more thoroughly about how to get help and how to abolish in time their relationship.
I think the men that I've spoken to, they found it difficult to go to friends and family.
Mm-hmm.
My mum was, after the relationship was over, she didn't understand that the aftermath of abuse. She was
Mhm.
like, the relationship's over. Okay, just go on with your life now. That's fine.
Right.
So
Right.
didn't understand that it doesn't stop with the end of the abuse.
Right.
And my friends were like, chuck the bitch out. That was it. It
Right.
wasn't, there was no sympathy there. It's like their attitude was, I wouldn't stand for it, chuck her out.
Yeah.
That was it, there's no understanding there. So
Right.
that's where male victims seem to stand. So it's again, it's a different.
It's definitely different. And for male victimology, the not knowing in terms of formal supports, on how formal supports need to support male victims, and there's not a whole lot of understanding with informal supports, from what I'm gathering from you based on your experiences and who you've spoken to in regards to this. You trying to utilize some supports, and that's what prevents male victims from speaking up. There's not a whole lot of backing there.
What do you think needs to happen with both formal support systems and informal support systems to get a good base to really support a victim?
I think they need to know, I think that there needs to be a distinction between what a male victim goes through versus a female victim goes through. I think they're two separate entities that need to be discovered. So I think, just because a victim, just being a victim, means one thing for a male, then means something completely different for a female. So I think that separation needs to happen. And that's why I think like a cycle of violence, particularly for male victimology, is going to be really important, because that cycle of violence and that cycle of abuse really goes for female victimology. So I definitely feel that there is a distinction between male victimology versus female victimology. And so with that being said, I think, again, your book is probably a pioneer in the field of male victimology, as to having that gap be filled up with more research, more experiences, more stories, more more information, educational wise, of that in itself. So it's not just like more research needs to be done, more writing needs to be done about it, more interviewing of male victimology and female victimology, but also training, like how now that we have the research and we have the data, what do we do with this? Like, how do we put it in a training model for formal supports? How do we excuse me, how do we train informal supports? What do we need to do? Excuse me, with that information? The information is there, but is the training available or
Yeah.
professionals to really know how to handle a male victim. It's not. It's
Yeah.
not there. It's not there. We're just starting to realize that it's becoming more and more of an issue.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially over lockdown, the numbers of male victims have gone through the roof. I don't know about the States, but I know here they have.
Yeah.
Where the female victim numbers stayed pretty much the same. Male victims went through the roof.
See, in the States, what happened was female victims went through the roof here in the States.
Yeah.
And perpetrators, now what we're seeing with the aftermath of the pandemic is a lot of family counseling, a lot of divorces and separations happening post pandemic because of, you know, living in such close quarters and being right under your thumb of your perpetrator.
Finally, if somebody is in a violent relationship or an abusive relationship, what would your advice be to them to prepare to leave?
I definitely, regardless if you're a male or if you're a female victim, I definitely feel like a planned out safety plan needs to take place. The point of leaving the toxic abusive relationship is probably the most dangerous time period for males and females that are victims.
Yeah.
That leaving, the separation is when violence really skyrockets. So I feel like a thought out, planned out, methodical safety plan on security, safety, well-being, needs to be developed for both the males and the females that are victims. So there is no way that the perpetrator can penetrate themselves in the victimology sphere. A lot of people, what they do is they get restraining orders that need to be on person, and even for male victims, you know, that restraining order needs to be on the person. And when the female perpetrator comes so close, that call needs to be had and that paperwork needs to be shown. And that's what happens. That's literally how it goes down in the States. There are things that a person can do. Friends suggest for female victims to go to a counselor. The counselor, there's a specific way that the counselor can help a female victim and meet them where they're at in terms of their abusiveness, and kind of develop with them in time an escape plan.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yes.
And
yes.
We've talked a lot about violence and verbal abuse. There are many different types of abuse. Could you just run through a few types of abuse for me?
There is all different types of abuse. We're talking emotional, mental, you know, which means like name calling, ridiculing, belittling. There's neglect is also abuse, like being neglectful to your partner is also a type of abuse, like emotional neglect. There's financial abuse where monies are being hidden or monies are being omitted. And there's financial abuse. There's spiritual abuse or religious abuse where people use the scriptures in the biblical sense to exert power and control over the victimology. So there's that. There's physical abuse that takes place, and we're talking about punches, slaps, weapons involved with this as well. There's sexual abuse that takes place for both men and women, you know, as well. So there's all different levels and types of spheres of abuse that do take place and that can be used methodically on a victim.
Yeah, I'm one of the things that I'm interested in is trying to change the definition of rape because at the moment rape is a male crime.
Mm-hmm.
It's all to do with penetration, and I'm trying to fight for the change in the definition of that, because I believe I was raped during my relationship.
Okay.
I had sex several times for fear of what would happen if I didn't.
Right. For retaliation.
Yeah.
Purposes. Yeah.
Yeah. So so that's a big issue of contention with me.
So that's also a very, that's a like a retaliatory rape, you would call it.
Yeah.
It's almost like, if you don't have sex with me, these are going to be the repercussions of you not having sex. And that's, for a man, that puts a lot of pressure and fear of what will happen if I don't perform and if I don't do what I need to do sexually to my perpetrator. So it definitely leaves a feeling of like almost like a confusion and a mind thing happening for the male victimology.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah.
And finally, what does the future hold for Michele Finneran?
The future holds, I am in the process of projecting a completely different type of topic in terms of a project, a new writing project that I'm trying to. I developed a proposal for, and I'm reached out to a couple people to look at it and propose it to some literary agents and stuff like that. So and something that I'm finding in my practice. I work really with a lot of first responders. I work with police officers. I work with detectives. I work with firefighters. I work with nurses. I work with teachers. I work with a lot of people that are on the front lines, especially during this pandemic. And I'm just doing a little bit of a research on how the pandemic has affected these people that have been on the front lines, having to do their jobs and facing the pandemic right in their face every single day and having to deal with it. So it's something that I'm very interested in doing. I'm still interested in blogging and educating. Interested. I used to be a associate professor at Ashford University as a teacher. I'm not doing that as much anymore because I'm more interested in the writing public publications. So I'm doing more of that. So I'm seeing right now between October and December, beginning of January is a very, very, very busy time in my practice. So I'm seeing a lot of clients that are in a lot of need right now.
Yeah.
Particularly during the holiday season, just having lost so many people during the pandemic and going through some grief and bereavement issues as well. So right now it's come the beginning of the year, we're going to set some new career goals. We're going to get some more ideas out there. We're going to learn. We're going to try to teach and educate and instruct and inform in different venues. I'm collaborating with an agency come the beginning of the year in the States, setting up some curriculum and some modules for some trainings. So I'm excited about that. So just, new things that are coming. I have a couple cities that are interested in knowing about my services and possibly helping certain municipalities out in the Broward County.
Very, very busy lady.
Very, very busy, very busy. But you know what, John, I'd rather be busy than bored.
Yeah.
I like to be productive. I love to help people. It's my aim. It's my mission. And I'm just like I kind of muscle through these things, and kind of try to get to as many people as I possibly can. I'm really right now I'm on a micro level. I really want to start working on a macro level.
Oh, God bless you for that.
Thank you.
Well, Thank you. I wish you all the best in all the projects that you're undertaking.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you very, very much for talking to me today. It's been fascinating.
Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to getting your book and reading it. And I'm just really interested in that perspective. I will research as to where the book is, but I did a little preliminary research, and it's innovative what you wrote.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's very kind.
You're welcome.
Okay, Michelle, thank you very much.
You're
Bless
welcome.
you. You take care. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.